want to talk to you about engineered infection prevention. You might be wondering what that's all about. We're looking to design hospitals and build technology in hospitals now to try to eliminate the environmental route of transmission. About 80% of disease transmission within a hospital occurs through the physical environment. So a surface has been involved, a foami, air has been involved, water's been involved, and we're trying to engineer that on an automatic basis to eliminate it. So that's the 80% solution. So all over the world, especially in the developed world, we have problems with hospital-acquired infections. I'm from Canada, and we have the dubious honor of leading in prevalence for hospital-acquired infections, top the chart at 10.5%, which means 1 in 10 people who stays overnight in the hospital is going to get a hospital-acquired infection in Canada. A lot of this data I'll give you is from my experience in Canada, but it's universal everywhere, not just the same everywhere. So in my country, every 2.5 minutes somebody's going to get an infection in a hospital that they went to for treatment, and every 52 minutes someone's going to die from the hospital that they went to for treatment. So that's 200,000 Canadians a year infected, 10,000 Canadians will die. It's 1 in 10 that stays overnight, 1 in 20 of those that get infected will die. It's the 3rd leading cause of death in Canada. Same in the U.S. They have 10 times the population, they have 10 times the numbers. They have 2 million people a year that get infected, and they have 100,000 who die a year from the hospital they go to for treatment. It hits us all personally. Everyone knows someone who's had a problem with a hospital-acquired infection. This is my neighbor of 13 years, Brian. He went into hospital this January. He got MRSA. He went home. He recovered. He went back in for treatment. He got C. diff in March, and he passed away in April. Almost all of us have someone that we know, a cousin, a grandmother, a grandfather, an aunt or an uncle, someone who's been personally affected by this. In Canada, we say it takes 17 years from innovation to implementation in healthcare, but we don't have that kind of time, given that every 2.5 minutes someone is getting infected. In the U.S., they have a moonshot going on right now where they're trying to eliminate the environmental route of transmission as well. So at the large American Society for Hospital Engineers conference this year in San Diego in the spring, they had a joint CDC-ASHE presentation to 3,200 people in attendance, calling for a 3-year elimination of air and water sources of disease in hospitals. At the American Infection Control National Conference this year in June, they called for a 5-year elimination of all sources of environmental contamination in hospitals. So Dr. Rattel, who gave the plenary presentation there, he is suggesting that we do research, technology, and automation to eliminate air and water and surface sources of infection in hospitals, which is exactly what we've been doing. So in Canada, our health minister said we're very strong with innovation in Canada, but we're very weak with implementation. So while we've developed some great technologies to address this, we haven't done a good job yet of rolling it out. We're starting, but it's early days yet. Essentially, what we want to do is stop the chain of infection. For 150 years, since the days of Florence Nightingale, we've been washing surfaces, we've been wearing PPE, and we've been using hand hygiene. But that's not very effective. So more recently, we've started antimicrobial stewardship. That's been a great adjunct. We've started more screening and isolation as people come into hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. But we really need to get to this point here. We're trying to break that chain in multiple places and do it automatically. In Canada, we have national standards, and we have 120 healthcare standards. I used to be the vice chair of the steering committee for all of those healthcare standards, and within that we have about 25 standards that are specifically due to the infrastructure of hospitals. And so we talk about how the air has to be treated, and how the water has to be treated, and how the design of a hospital has to be. And we've started incorporating some of this technology now into our national standards to make the minimum standards for hospitals. This is a standard that I worked on that said, if you're going to create smoke in an operating room using laser surgery or electrocautery, you should capture that smoke so people aren't breathing it in, so we're not creating disease. And it was a pretty significant change. So we came out with that in 2009. We gave it over to ISO, and now it's become a global standard as of 2014. Essentially, capture any smoke that you produce in the operating rooms. We have a national design standard, and we've gone to single patient rooms. So when you design a new hospital in Canada now, they all have to be single patient rooms. And so we found that it's about a 30% lower infection rate if you have single patient rooms in hospitals. We have a standard in training and accreditation programs for infection control during construction because of all the dust that's created and the pools of water, et cetera, we're leading to much higher incident rates of disease transmission during construction than during non-construction. And that's been a major program in Canada, and they've picked it up in the US now as well. Air, so how we handle HVAC systems in hospitals. So we've got a brand new version of that just came out about 3 or 4 months ago, and we've increased the requirements for filtration. We've added things like UV into as a recommendation for treatment of air, especially recirculated air within the hospital. Water systems. We've gone from mentioning the word infection control in our national standard twice to 89 times. We've added 3 new annexes, all to do with Legionella mitigation, Legionella programs, Legionella monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. We have this new express document that we just put out that talks about all these new emerging technologies that are coming out. And this is just kind of an introduction to hospitals to help them evaluate what's coming out, because there are all kinds of things. And so this is just to give you a general checklist. What would be my ideal disinfectant, or what would be my ideal technology to protect patients in that environment? We have a couple of proposals for new standards to come out. What should the surfaces be like in hospitals? And how should we be cleaning hospital rooms or disinfecting hospital rooms? But these are some of the emerging technologies that are coming out. There's a whole basket of them. And so you have a number of different suppliers out there, a number of different manufacturers, a number of proponents who say, I've got this great thing, or I've got this thing that's, you know, the greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, how is a hospital to choose or decide or figure out what they should be using? These are the big 3 technologies that I see right now that are having an immediate impact: UV, copper, and ozone. And I'll just go through each of those 3. So UV has been around for a long, long time, used for a disinfectant, but we've primarily been using it for air and water disinfection ever since the 1800s. We've only just gotten around to starting to use it for disinfecting physical spaces, physical surfaces, just recently. Right now, when we go into a patient room every day to clean that patient room, and this is, again, these are North American numbers, we give 15 minutes to that housekeeper to clean that room. So that's to go into the bathroom, to go into the patient room, to declutter everything, to empty the garbages, to wipe down all the surfaces, and then to go over them with a disinfectant, and then set up the room. So 15 minutes to do that, not long enough. When we have a terminal clean, when somebody goes home before the next patient comes in, we give them 30 minutes to do that. Still not enough. And if it's an isolation case, we typically give them 45 minutes or up to an hour, or we do a double clean of that room if they have a known case of VRE or C. diff or MRSA in that room. And what we found is less than half of the surfaces are cleaned well enough for disinfection. Here again, Dr. Rucella presented, about 32% of the surfaces are cleaned well enough to disinfect, typically in a terminal discharge. In 2011, we started seeing some studies on UV disinfection of patient rooms at terminal discharge. And by 2013, we were starting to see some claims as high as 50% or higher of reductions in HAIs. So that looked very promising. And we went from about 6 companies, 5 years ago that were starting to propose mobile UV disinfection to about 30 companies worldwide now that are doing it. There are all kinds of studies out now, though, that show how effective UV is at disinfecting patient rooms. And so a reduction in bioburden leads to a reduction in HAIs. How much? Yet to be determined, and your mileage is going to vary by facility. But there are lots of trials now that are well validated that show you've got significant reductions in HAIs when you just disinfect rooms with UV at terminal discharge. So here's a study done by a Canadian doctor who went and looked, I think that's a laser, is it? At a number of rooms and just cultured all the rooms, and she was looking for C. diff, and she found 7 out of 21 rooms were colonized with C. diff before a patient ever entered that room. She sent the housekeepers in to do their standard terminal discharge cleaning, and 5 out of 21 were still colonized after they had done their work. She sent in the UV machines afterwards to disinfect, and 0 out of 21 were colonized afterwards. She then went on to do a study in her hospital, and she compared a couple of different UV machines, and then she bought some UV devices and started using them at terminal discharge. And you can see in this graph here, every month she was tracking her overtime hours for cleaning. And whenever they had an outbreak, they would do double cleans of rooms, and that would increase their overtime hours. And it was getting pretty crazy. And she introduced UV, and you can see once she introduced UV, her outbreaks went to 0, her overtime hours went to 0. It's a large study that was first presented last fall. So it was CDC funded, 9 hospitals. It was a large cluster randomized control trial. And for 6 months, they would disinfect a hospital with the regular quats, or their quaternary compounds. And then for 6 months, they would add UV to that. And then for 6 months, they would use nothing but bleach to disinfect the rooms. And then for 6 months, they would use bleach plus UV. And essentially what they found was the chemicals alone were not enough to prevent the next patient from being exposed to the patient before. So they had a 32% reduction in infections when they added UV to quats, and 37% reduction when they added UV to bleach. In the US, there's up to 800 hospitals now that are already using mobile UV disinfection. And the machines are $100,000 to $140,000 US a piece. Take anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour to do. In Canada, we only have about 8 hospitals that have purchased them. We have a number of hospitals that are looking at them, 99,000 Canadian, but a 5-minute solution. So we've got different technologies in different countries that are starting to be adopted. But where I think this is going to go is not the mobile UV disinfection. Mobile is very good at giving you immediate relief, but I think fixed UV built into the hospital is kind of going to be the future of hospitals. Copper is one of the big 3. So a lot of studies have come out recently showing copper's efficacy at reducing bioburden. Copper has been registered by the EPA in the US for reducing bioburden, 99.9% reduction within less than 2 hours. Here is an electron micrograph of stainless steel. And you can see in that deep scratch in there all the bacteria that are harbored in there. Stainless steel has no antimicrobial properties whatsoever, and yet it's the material that's used ubiquitously throughout hospitals because it looks hospital clean. It looks bright and shiny, but it's not clean. Clean and disinfected are 2 entirely different things. So the appearance of clean does not equal disinfection. So this is from a specification for a new hospital that was being built. And in that specification, they were asking for infection control 23 times when they were specifying the materials to go in there, and specifying stainless steel 19 times. And yet the 2 are essentially mutually exclusive. Here's what happens when you inoculate stainless steel 8 times in 24 hours. You get an exponential growth of your colonies. Here's what happens when you inoculate copper 8 times in 24 hours. It goes to 0, goes to 0, goes to 0. A big study funded, again in the US, by the Department of Defense, randomized control trial at ICUs in these 3 major hospitals. And essentially what they did was they took 6 surfaces that you touch all the time, high-touch surfaces, bed rails, overbed tables, IV poles, just 6 surfaces in those ICUs, they changed over to copper. And they found 97% of the time when they swabbed those surfaces, not enough bacteria to affect transmission. And that led to a 58% reduction in infections in those 3 ICUs. The return on investment, now things are expensive in US healthcare, but their return on investment, 29 to 43 days, depending on the hospital and how they calculated their costs. Companies all over the world now are starting to make things out of copper, and it doesn't have to be pure copper, anything that's 60% or higher, or anything that's been engineered and registered. So some things as low as 16.5% copper have been engineered and registered as biocidal products. It lasts forever. Here's Grand Central Station, built in 1901. And if you go and culture the surfaces that are brass or copper, you will find you have double-digit CFU counts, as opposed to 1,866 for a wood surface. Ozonated water. So ozone has been around for a long time. Ozone is a great disinfectant in the air. You don't want to breathe it. Low levels of it are very toxic to humans, but in water, it's a very effective disinfectant. So if we look at the oxidizing potential of ozone compared to bleach, you can see it's 2.2 times stronger than what bleach is. And it's also much faster acting than bleach. And of course, it's non-toxic. So ozonated water, if you buy Dasani water, you'll see one of the ingredients in it is ozone. Companies that are bottling water or sewage treatment plants, et cetera, are using ozone for disinfection. Ozonated water is registered in Canada and the US as a sanitizer, as a food grade sanitizer, generally safe for use. All right, inside a hospital ice machine. So you can see in here the mold and growth inside that hospital. Now we can't normally see bacteria or viruses on surfaces, but we can see mold, and so that's a good indicator of what's going on inside. So this hospital that I took these pictures from, they have 14 ice machines in their hospital, and every 3 months they go through and open them all up, and they clean all the mold and black stuff out of there, and then they put them back together and away they go. So we thought it would be really interesting to see if we could do something to mitigate the mold and mildew, and then test to see what they were packaging in their ice, because the last thing we'd want to do is package bacteria in our ice and feed it to our patients, but it is exactly what we are doing. So these are known bacteria outbreaks that have come from hospitals from ice machines. So we've experimented with a device like this. There are other devices out on the market. You could use UV directly onto the ice surfaces. This one happens to pull air through a UV machine, and then it fractures the water molecules that are in the air, and then it creates kind of they call it a photoplasma, but essentially it turns the air into a disinfectant. And so what you end up doing is you mount that little device up at the top of the machine, you pull in room air through the UV, and then you pump the air down inside, so the air is coating all the surfaces. And here's what it looks like now, after 9 months with no cleaning. It looks brand new. So that's an engineered solution. And what we're proposing is an engineered bundle so that you're using several technologies together to get to zero. So 17 years of innovation to implementation. We don't have that kind of time. We need to do it now. We can start right at the source of air that's coming into the hospitals. So right now in our air handling units, we have these devices, these coils that are trying to cool our air. In that environment, in that space, it's very wet and it's very humid. It's very conducive to bacterial and mold growth. And so what you'll find is a biofilm that forms on the coils. As soon as you get a 0.3 micron biofilm in your coils, you've lost 10% efficiency through your equipment. So, and they continue to get more and more moldy as time goes on. They've got to be scraped out once a year. All you would have to do, though, is put in a light that would shine on there, and it would just be like the ice machine. It would stay perfectly clean for that period of time. So this is what it looks like if you use a UV light on your coils. That's what it looks like if you don't. And there's a great study done here in the UK, actually, that showed the energy savings when you use UV light, because the flow restriction is not there anymore. Downstream of the filters in the hospital, especially if you're recirculating the air at all, you should be looking at adding UV disinfection to your system. So disease usually transmits within the hospital. It doesn't come from outside as much as it does come from inside. Of particular interest, IVF clinics. So there's been several papers that have published to show that when you're doing in vitro fertilization, you can almost double your clinical pregnancy rate by treating your air as a clean room. So the filtration has to be there, remove all VOCs, and then disinfect the biologicals with UV, and you will virtually double your clinical pregnancy rate. CREs, CPEs, we heard about this morning. So in the UK, it was almost unheard of until 2008, but now it's an exponential growth. So the CPEs primarily that we're seeing all around the world right now are coming from sink drains. So there are other sources of them, but primarily they're coming from sink drains. So you may have a KPC outbreak or an E. coli outbreak, but it's likely coming from a sink drain. And we have a new device out now, and we have one showing here, but we're dispensing ozonated water now for a hand hygiene sink. The idea there, the ozonated water, it's a better disinfectant than bleach, but it's not just disinfecting your hands, it's also disinfecting that sink drain. So it's programmed to disinfect that drain every hour, so you never get a biofilm buildup. You eliminate the risk of a CPE outbreak from sink drains.
That's kind of what it looks like when it's running. So there's no faucet, there's no spout, there's fewer surfaces that you would have to clean. Backlit with a blue LED that targets your hands or whatever surfaces it's touching. It's a splash dam so that it rolls the water down in as opposed to creating a lot of splash. Toilet seats. So your mom may have warned you about toilet seats when you're younger, I'm not sure, but mine did. So this toilet seat has been coated with an engineered copper surface. And 99.9% reduction in less than 20 minutes. So virtually 3 or 4 minutes, 90% of the bacteria that's transmitted to that surface has been eliminated. So when you think of the bathroom bugs in particular, VRE and C. diff, they come from the bathroom. We can put surfaces all through the hospital that are brass. We can go back to using brass hardware as opposed to using stainless steel hardware. There are companies like this one who makes, it looks like a Corian surface. It's a solid surface, and it has copper embedded right into it. There are companies that make plastics with copper embedded right in. There are also companies that do things with silver. And silver works as well, but not as well. So silver, under the conditions that you would have in a hospital of 20 degrees and lower than 50% humidity, wouldn't be nearly as fast acting as what copper would be. Silver is fantastic for implants, for materials that are going in your body where it's very warm, it's 37 degrees and it's very humid. Its action is much, much better. But when you get into a cooler, drier environment, copper is much more efficacious than silver. There are companies that are coming out now with sprays, so you can put titanium dioxide onto walls. That's a photocatalyst in the presence of light or some other form of energy like UV. It will disinfect everything in that room. You can put quats or silanes into sprays that you put on as well, so you've got a continuous, persistent, safe surface to touch. There's a company, Sherwin-Williams, has just come up with a paint that has a material in it, the same thing. It's been registered 99.9% reduction in less than 2 hours. We can use these mobile disinfection devices to flash the room when people go home before the next patient comes in. So that'll cut your infection rate usually about in half, but it depends on what it was to start with. It certainly protects you from anyone who's had a disease before. If the patient before you has had VRE, C. diff, or MRSA, you've got a 2 to 3-fold chance of catching that disease than if you were in a neighboring room where the patient didn't. Patient bathroom. So this device here, we just had a couple of papers published on it. It's an automatic bathroom disinfection device. So every time a patient goes into a bathroom and exits the bathroom is disinfected. So it takes 5 minutes to disinfect the bathroom to give you a log 6 reduction. And every 4 hours, it will automatically re-disinfect that bathroom regardless of whether somebody goes into it. So we did a study at a local hospital along with the University of Waterloo, and this is what the culture plates look like if you don't use a device like that. So we would sample 3 surfaces in each bathroom as well as a 1-hour air sample. And if we use the UV devices, that's what the plates would look like. If we didn't, that's what they looked like. And so we did a protocol of off, on, off, 18 days off, 18 days on, and then off again to see if it returned. And we found that within 24 hours, the plates went right back to looking the way they did before. We also found that every room had its own signature, its own fingerprint. So I could tell just by looking at the plate which room that device or that plate had coming from. So when you kill the things that are in the room, its burden all around infills what you had just killed. So when you just wipe a surface, everything around there is going to infill very quickly. Within 24 hours, it's going to be right back to where it was before. So if you disinfect an entire patient room, you've got a lot better chance of starting over from fresh. But all the same air is coming into it, all the same people are walking into it, and all the same staff are shedding. So that room is eventually going to look just like it had looked the day before, which is why you need repeated disinfections. So in our study, we found the doors were being closed 27 to 44% of the time. the UV device didn't flash unless the doors were closed. So that led to a 65% reduction in bacteria. We have a hospital out in BC where they did a similar kind of a study. It was just published in the American Journal of Infection Control last week. And in that study, they closed their doors 100% of the time, and they had a 95 to 97% reduction in their surface bacteria. Now that hospital is one of the worst in Canada. They have 4 patients in each room, and then had 2 to 3 rooms all sharing one bathroom. So 8 to 12 patients sharing a single bathroom. So consequently, like they had the worst bathroom to patient ratio, they also had the worst C. diff infection rate, consequently. So they were running 13 to 15 C. diff infections a month. They've put these devices into 10 shared bathrooms, and they reduced it to 1 case per month. They invested a total of $25,000. Their first year calculated savings for treatment, about $400,000. They got a provincial award for their initiative, $700,000, so total first year return of $1.1 million. Annually, 170 people now are going to be spared C. diff. And 170 families are going to be spared having to go through that, and about 40 lives are going to be spared. Winnipeg Health Sciences, they put in 2 of the mobile systems, and they had endemic VRE, and then they purchased some of the bathroom ones, and then they purchased more of the bathroom ones, and over time, when they got enough bathrooms under control and started using the machines enough, they finally took their 4-year endemic outbreak down to virtually 0. Vancouver General Hospital, they have a bone marrow transplant ward there. We've been involved with the clinical trial. It's been ongoing since August of last year. 3 rooms in there, we've treated the air and the water and surfaces. We filter the air, we filter the water, we flash the bathrooms with UV, and we put copper surfaces all around the patients. So before our intervention, their infection rate in there was about 40%, with about a 50% mortality rate for the people who were infected. We have not had 1 infection in over a year in those intervention rooms. So a bundle it can be quite effective. This is just a look into what a typical room might be in the future. These are some prototype devices for disinfecting entire patient room. Final versions of a finished commercial product will be out later this year. But essentially, if you were to use ozonated water, an automatic patient room disinfection system, an automatic patient bathroom disinfection system, plus copper surfaces, plus treated air, you could virtually eliminate the environmental route of transmission in hospitals. This is a quick calculation of what your return on investment would be, and I don't know the cost of treatment, et cetera, in the UK, but based on Canadian numbers, if we were to take a 200-bed hospital, and we estimate our cost to be $20,000 or about 12,000 pounds per infection. If we were to look at that, we can invest at different levels, depending on whether we just want to do bathroom UV, or we want to do bathroom UV plus water or plus air, et cetera, or if we want to do everything. And so if we wanted to do everything in this 200-bed hospital, we'd be spending $3.9 million, but we'd be expecting a savings first year of about $8.9 million. And of course, we'd be saving 448 infections and about 22 lives. We can calculate that on a larger hospital scale, or we can calculate that on a whole national scale. Any way we look at it, the return on investment to build it into your building is phenomenal. So, while we were talking here, back at home in Canada, 23 patients were infected and 1 died.